Hello, Garland Nixon, and it is Tropical Shirt Thursday. Larry Johnson and I. Let's talk. Hello. Excuse me.
Bless you. Salud.
Must be all the fruit on this shirt. All the fruits on the shirts getting me. Yeah. We're hanging out again as usual on a Thursday with the one and only Larry Johnson. And for those of you who might have been living under a rock and you don't know where to go for all the important information, it's Larry's website, sonar21.com. That's sonar21.com. That's Larry's website. As you can see, great articles. And he has Peter Hansler. He has Valerie Krilko. So he has other people who come in and he has guest writers. And of course, you can subscribe, and you should if you want to keep up with what's going on. And of course, you can support through PayPal, PayShoot, Patreon, or buy me a coffee. As we always discuss, the people who do this stuff, nobody here is getting rich. In fact, most of us, to some extent are putting a lot of money out of our own pockets. It costs money to run a website. So if you can afford it, make sure you help Larry out and you subscribe and donate any way you can. Thanks a lot, everybody. All right, let's get going. Larry, the obvious is, let's start with this. The obvious is Alaska. And of course, I've seen some claims that there are those who wish to do Vladimir Putin bad and things of that nature. In fact, you have an article about out there. I'll bring the article up on Sonar 21. Ukraine reportedly working frantically to disrupt Putin and the Trump summit. And as always, I will not be surprised if there's some massive, drone raid in Moscow, whatever the hell. They always do this stuff the night before a summit. I think everybody knows that's coming. But there was some discussion about somebody trying to sneak into Alaska. I don't know how much I've seen it on Telegram and some things like that. I don't know how much it is to it. What are your thoughts on this stuff, Larry?
Well, yeah, when I saw this one story surfaced, it's called off of a site called Real Raw News, mm-hmm. And they should change their name to Real Bad News because they're just fabricators. They told the story that just on Sunday, the group of a 10th Mountain 10th Special Forces Group hit a house in a town outside in Wasilla, Alaska, and inside was a Ukrainian sniper who they killed him. He had a scoped, silenced Daniel Defense DDM-4. He had 2 pistols. And so I'm going when they threw in tear gas and it didn't go off, and then when they broke through the door, he pulled his gun and they shot and killed him. And I'm going, okay, there's so much wrong with this story to start with. Number one, how does a Ukrainian get into the United States and get his hands on a Daniel Defense rifle? It's basically an AR platform, M4. That's about a $2,400 gun. So it doesn't come cheap. And then to have a silencer, to get a silencer for one of those, you just don't go into your local gun stores. Yeah, I'd like to buy a silencer. Those are essentially licensed, and you got to carry the paperwork around with them. And then he's got a scoped rifle. Well, they didn't know Alaska was going to be the spot until just 2 or 3 days ago. So there's no way in hell you could put all that equipment together and get it to this guy in Alaska. And then plus, he didn't carry the rifle intact there. Or let's say he had somebody else, some third party helping him. Still, you got to go zero the rifle. just because you know, got to make sure the optic works for you. So it's just like, and then if they really had that kind of information that, oh, we've tracked this Ukrainian sniper, first call would be to, you know, they said, well, the Secret Service, Trump intervened and gave it to the military, not Secret Service. Number one, Secret Service has their own SWAT team. Okay. So they've got a team capable of doing that. But if they couldn't do it, FBI, HRT, you call them up.
Yep.
And then if they couldn't do it, well, okay, then you might ask Delta Force or SEAL Team 6 to come in. But, you know, you don't start clearing a house by tossing in a smoke grenade or a tear gas canister. You use a flashbang. So when you add it all up, I went, you know what? This is just somebody writing a story for clicks. That's all it was. Now, the Russians themselves were reporting that they anticipated Ukraine was going to launch, as you said at the outset, you know, some drone strike, do something dramatic to try to derail it. I don't think it's going to get derailed. Putin held a meeting today at the Kremlin with about 20 people. They included the head of the central bank, the head of their equivalent of the Department of Treasury, the head of both their equivalent to the FBI and the CIA and their Department of Defense. Minister of Defense Belousov is there. The general in charge of the general staff, Gerasimov, is there. He was really the only military guy. Everybody else, foreign minister was there, Lavrov, and Ushakov. So, big meeting, and a variety of them were given briefings about, what the current situations were and then they provided the list of who's going to accompany Putin. And it's about 8 people. But none of the military. Gerasimov's not going. And what that tells you is Putin's not going to be talking about military things. He is taking along Belousov, the defense minister. But, the whole issue of the war in Ukraine doesn't look, at least from Russia's standpoint, is going to be the main issue to talk about. They're going to be talking about other things. So now the Russians clearly are making preparations. You don't see similar preparations on the Trump side of the house. So, this is they're going in unprepared, and the Russians they'll have every I dotted, every T crossed. They are meticulous in their planning, and it will, Trump. I think Trump's not going to want this to be a failure. So the odds are that he will spin it as a great success.
Well, here's what I thought. I'm just going to throw this at you. We're all speculating. We're trying to figure this thing out. You get one school of thought, oh, the Russians don't know what they're doing, and they're just going to be. And I'm like this. I've been paying attention to Putin and Lavrov. They're not stupid guys. There's nothing that I can figure out that they haven't already figured out.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? So here's my thought. This is what I thought as soon as they said, well, you know what? Basically, we can talk. They said they give us something acceptable, understanding that acceptable is an English word, and it's been translated from a Russian word that may not mean exactly the same as acceptable. But whatever they said, here's the way I thought. The first thing I thought, it's interesting because they don't have to talk about the war if that's right. What did the Russians, the U.S. and the West has been saying, oh, land swap, and do you want to take this amount? And the Russians have said, this ain't about land. It's about NATO expansion.
Yeah,
root cause.
Exactly right.
We want to talk about the root cause, and the root cause has always been NATO expansion. And they kept saying, well, Trump wants to meet with Putin, and Putin said, nah, we're not until we got things to talk, get where we need to be. I feel like that quite possibly, just speculation, that the Trump team said, okay, we'll talk about NATO expansion. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the root causes. And Russia said, now we'll send somebody. That's now what the guy said in I, Robot with Will Smith. Now you're asking the right question, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So to me, if they're meeting with the Russians, they must have said to the Russians, I would think they had to have said, we're willing to talk about your priority. Okay, we'll talk about NATO expansion. At least have a discussion. We'll have a discussion about a new security agreement. There's something that the Russians have as a priority to talk about that the Trump administration said we will talk about that. Well, I ain't saying they'll accomplish anything. What do you think of that, Larry?
No, I think it's there clearly have been conversations between, I'm not sure if it was Rubio with Lavrov or one of their underlings with one of Lavrov's underlings. But there have been discussions. Now, we don't know what those consist of. Russia has made, in the foreign ministry, made it very, very clear yesterday and reiterated it today that they are not going to entertain any discussion about returning land that Russia has adopted into the country. That is off the table. So they can bring it, the U.S. can bring it up, but the Russians are going to say, non-issue, let's move on. But I can come up with a long list of things that the interests are in the mutual interests of both countries that would provide a foundation for discussion. I mean, top of the list, arms control.
Yeah.
It's the United States that walked away from that, and now the United States is getting its ass kicked because Russia has produced an intermediate range, I'm not going to call it ballistic missile, an intermediate range hypersonic missile, because you can steer that baby. And there's nothing that the U.S. has to counter it, number one. That Russia is now deploying a nuclear-powered, catch this, nuclear-powered cruise missile that carries a nuclear warhead. The reason it's nuclear powered, it can go up in the air and stay up for weeks. It's not, it can get up and be cruising around. You just let it take off and say, well, we'll call you when we need you, Russia also has fielded and is operating now a directed energy weapon that is being used to take down drones. That literally is firing at drones and burning through their motor housing and causing them to crash. So you got the arms control deal. You've got the economic exploration in the Arctic. The Russians got a plethora of icebreakers. The United States does. I don't think we even have one functioning icebreaker. But Russia has talked about a cooperative partnership with the United States. There's also been discussion, Dmitriev on the Russian side, about building a bridge and or tunnel from Alaska to Russia to connect the two countries.
The old peace bridge, huh?
Yeah. Then there's the cooperation on the space front, because remember, for 20 years it was the United States having to go to Russia saying, "Hey, give us a ride to the space station because we can't get there." And then, to open up and say, look, a long-term security plan, we need to de-escalate, not escalate. But part of that de-escalation is getting U.S. troops out of Europe and getting U.S. weapons out of Europe, including nuclear bombs. So there's a lot to talk about without having to deal with the war, because frankly, the war for Ukraine is lost. And, Trump, there's nothing that Trump or NATO can do to save him.
Well, and I'll throw another one at you, Larry. I think it's a win. That just doing this is a win for Russia for this reason. If you remember, and I'm sure you covered it too, in December of 2021, I believe it was, when the Russians first released their list of issues that they wanted to talk right. about, right? And back then they said, and I remember reading, I forgot, it might have been Lavrov that said, we want to talk to the puppet master, not the puppets, right? They said, we don't want to talk to NATO. We don't want to talk to Europeans. We don't want to talk to Ukrainians. We want to talk to the people in charge, to the Americans, right? And of course, by now we're not talking to whatever, but
right.
The Russians have always maintained, and I agree with them, it's critical that they have a line of conversation between them and the U.S. There's three powers: China, Russia, and the U.S. Everybody else is in second place. You know what I mean? And it's a long way between first and second place, right? So my point being, opening and then saying, okay, well, Trump will come here. Opening and maintaining a direct line of discussion, conversation, and negotiations between the highest levels of the U.S. and the Russians, I think, is a win for Russia in the long term, and it establishes something that they can't get with the Europeans and don't want because they're lunatics.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think even Putin acknowledges the need to try to provide Europe with some assurance, some guarantee that we don't want your damn countries. Okay. Right. God, why would you want those headaches? There's some areas that are beautiful and such, but again, all this is taking place against the backdrop of Trump going out of his way to actually piss off the Europeans too. I was being interviewed the other day, or had a conversation with Zariel. He's connected with the Duran. He sort of does moderation for Duran, and he's a former Swiss military officer, and so we got conversing, and he was sharing how angry the Swiss are at the United States now because of the tariffs that Trump is imposing, both on gold and on financial arrangements. But Zariel pointed out to me something I didn't know, which is that 93% of the diabetes medication that comes into the United States, guess where it comes from?
And I thought you were going to say 93% of the chocolate was Swiss.
Yeah. Well, as I told Zariel, when I think of Swiss exports, I'm saying, okay, chocolate, cuckoo clocks,
bikini models.
Watches.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Bank. Shady bank accounts. But I had never thought, that the U.S. is dependent on Switzerland. And interestingly enough, I guess the Trump administration did carve out, okay, we're not going to attack, we're not going to tariff that. But I'm thinking, if I'm the Swiss, said, if you're going to tariff this other stuff, we're having some production problems with our diabetes medicine. No, we're not going to be shipping as much of it.
We're going to raise the price. And whatever percentage that you tariff us, that's the percentage we're going to double raise the price of the diabetes medicine.
They have lots of options. But my point in all of this is Trump, instead of trying to enlist and befriend other countries, is just going out of his way to see how many he can piss off. And so, it's not like, he's got a solid group of Europeans behind him. In fact, they're trying to tell him what to do, and he's ignoring them. And I'm not saying that he should follow their advice at all. But, Putin knows Trump. This will be their fourth meeting. So he knows that Trump in person is a very different person, both personality, demeanor, how he talks. And I've spoken with people that have been in small sessions with Trump. Trump he's a very insecure person. I mean, we see that by virtue of, hey, I've stopped 6 wars. Give me the Nobel Peace Prize. that kind of thing. I'm the greatest. I'm the best. It's always this exaggerated talk. And one friend said to me, he says, the problem for Trump is when he was a kid growing up, and you would be outside, you'd be playing football, basketball, baseball. It came time to choose up teams. He was always the last one chosen. Nobody wanted him. He wasn't somebody that people wanted around. And he's been compensating for that ever since. So when he's in these meetings, he actually is very eager to be liked. And he's not adopting, like you've seen it with Zelensky when they're got the press and everybody about he's aggressive and you don't have any Trump card. That's Trump with his public persona, the character he played on, The Apprentice. But behind closed doors, different person.
Yeah, I just there are a lot of people that are opposed to this. I see a lot of advantages for Russia, and I don't mean advantages in a competitive way. Oh, we're going to get advantage over the United States. I think it benefits the U.S. It always benefits you to meet with other great powers. But I
Right.
see a lot of good things. They get to speak with the Americans. They get to say to Trump, because I think he's fed a bunch of crap by these lunatics around him are always telling him the Russians are losing 2 million soldiers or something like that. That Putin says, or this is what Putin really wants, take all of Ukraine. Trump even said, I think he wants to take all of Ukraine, blah, blah, blah. That the President Putin's list gets to sit down in front of him and say, this is what I want. This is where I'm coming from. Do you have any questions? And I think that, I don't know if it'll do any good, but I don't think it'll hurt.
Yeah, well, some of this may not be entirely Donald Trump's fault. And what I mean by that is I think the intelligence community is lying to him. We've got evidence that they are lying on two issues. We had Cy Hirsch put an article out last week, and in it he quoted this intelligence community official saying that this war between Russia and Ukraine was about territory. And it's so if the intelligence community, and I have no doubt that that's what they tend to believe. Now, to believe that is just not to be well read or even understand anything about Russia, but that's a whole other issue. And then the repetition about the 2 million casualties. Again, Cy had that in another article that preceded this last one, where Russia, claiming Russia had suffered 2 million casualties. Again, you're getting that from the intelligence community. And and they're telling Trump that, so Trump's believing it. And they may have constructed the narrative that, Russia is suffering, their economy is bad, they're suffering terrible losses. There's just no way they can hang in there. So all you got to do is keep a little more pressure, they're going to collapse. No, they made a mistake. When you use that description, you're talking about Ukraine, okay? Ukraine's going to collapse. That's where they're headed, but not Russia. So that failure to understand and appreciate that. The latest, I mean, have you heard this? The media is talking about, Trump's going to offer Russia some of the rare earths that are in Alaska. And I'm going, are you shitting me? I mean, Russia has more rare earths than we have they've got it. They don't need us. There's not a single economic thing they need from us. Would they like to have open commerce and the flow of goods back and forth? Sure. I go into I've been there now 4 or 5 times. And when I go into the stores, in the junk food section, Snickers, Milky Way, Reese's peanut butter cups, all the crap that's turning Americans into diabetics. So we've shipped over there too. It's our secret weapon. So but there's still Burger King. Burger King hasn't bailed out. McDonald's did, and they've taken it over and rebranded it. But it's McDonald's it's still sort of golden arches. But other fast food. So on the fast food side, but there's also a lot from the standpoint of equipment that Russia in the past was willing to buy some U.S. equipment, but now that they got caught, and jet engines, planes from Boeing. But now since the sanctions, Russia said, "Oh, we'll just build our own." And they have, and so they'll start fielding their own fleet of commercial aircraft that'll be a competitor to the 737 and Boeing. Just dumb on our part. So like I said, there's lots outside of the context of the war, but what Russia really wants is to go back to that agreement they presented, the draft treaty they presented to Biden in December 2021, saying, hey, we need to get, NATO needs to back away. NATO needs to stop pressing up on our borders. You need to stop conducting NATO exercises in Ukraine. And we need to find out a way that we can cooperate with you to provide you the assurances so that you don't have to worry that we're going to attack you. And the Biden people said, screw off. We don't, you're not going to tell us what to do.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. I did want to ask you about one particular issue, and that is, people talk about it a little bit, but they kind of brush it off. But I think it's a big one, and that's India. And I think that the U.S. thought, you know what, India, they'll just do what the hell we tell them to do. If we tell them jump, they'll say how high. And the U.S. said, okay, here's what we're going to do. You've got to stop buying Russian oil, or we're going to tariff you. And India said, and we ain't going to do it. They said, well, in that case, we're hitting you with 50%. And they said, we're going to be over here talking to the Chinese because they know that'll piss us off. But not just that. In the real world, countries have to sell and buy things. And if the
Right.
U.S. says we're not going to buy and sell things with you, 50%, a lot of things is just going to price things out of the market, where some of the things they sell of us and buy from us, it just isn't going to work. They're going to have to go to China and say, hey, China, I know we've had our differences in the past, but we need to sell this. Will you buy it? We need to buy this. Will you sell it? These people over here are lunatics. I think they were surprised. And I think it's a big deal, because for not just that we're losing markets and more people are pushing back, but that an India-China alliance is checkmate for Russia, China, and India, and Iran, and North Korea. Checkmate.
Yeah, well, I don't think the Trump administration did their homework on this. If I'm going to sanction you, I need to make sure that either you're buying. I've got some leverage. I have to have leverage, and one portion of leverage is, 60% of your exports come to me, and so if I'm going to start putting a tariff on those, that's going to really affect your economy. That's going to in a major way. Well, the reality for India, 2%, only 2% of the GDP is tied up with trade to the United States. Well, that's nothing. You can adjust that by going elsewhere and doing other things. And what's astonishing, again, this is another example like Switzerland, what Trump's policies have done to him, that backfired. A year ago, if you would have asked me about how strong are Brazil and India in the Brics picture, because I knew that China and Russia were fully engaged. South Africa, yeah, but they're, South Africa is just sort of they're along for the ride. They're not that big of an economy. But India and Brazil had some, and I really thought that because Brazil was going to have the presidency of Brics this year, that Lula would actually sabotage it, that he could have been enticed by the CIA to do something. Well, in the wake of these tariffs that Trump has done, he has energized both India and Brazil in ways they never were before in terms of wanting to use Brics. And Trump actually, he might get a Nobel Peace Prize out of this, because he's brought Brics together. But in the Indians and Chinese, setting aside their differences, they're starting to have flights between the two countries. They're improving their trade relations, because actually China and India have a pretty close relationship on the pharmaceutical front, that a lot of the raw ingredients come out of China that are turned into, the basics for pharmaceutical products that are called APIs, that are then used to actually manufactured brand name drugs. So, and the United States was creating some real problems for itself by putting these kinds of tariffs on India, because we actually need some of those pharmaceuticals. So it just, like I said, there hasn't been a lot of thought, strategic thinking on the part of the Trump administration. They're just sort of throwing punches to see what lands. But because we're doing that, the rest of the world is reacting like you would react if you're in a bar and somebody comes in acting crazy and shouting and hurling insults and threatening to pick fights. Everybody sort of back away and sort of start figure out, hey, okay, you call the police. And you start taking action to counter the crazy person. I think that's what we're starting to see the world do. The world's starting to react to Donald Trump in America because we're acting like a crazy person.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, these tariffs, I was talked to a person I know who's Indian and who has a lot of connections in India. And what they had said to me was, they said, look, as far as the Indian government, kind of burning the hatchet with China, it'll one of the reasons they'll have problems is because they've run so much anti-China propaganda that they built up this anti-China, kind of like we do here, right? They built this up and they have trouble getting around that because they've already built this up amongst the people. Now they're saying, you know what? The people are pissed, and they're like, "Yeah, the government needs to do whatever." They're pissed at us. Now people are talking about in China, in India, about boycotting U.S. goods. Farmers are saying, "Let's boycott their stuff." So what we have done is given the Indian government political cover. That if they want rapprochement with China, we've created an environment where instead of the people saying, "What are you doing?" the people are going to be like, "Oh, well, hell, we're pissed at the U.S.
Right.
If there's anything we can do that's going to piss them off, let's go for it."
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it comes back to this theme that the Russians are planners. They're thinking ahead. They're thinking strategically. They're thinking about their relations with a number of other countries. In fact, you saw that after that meeting with Witkoff, Putin got on the phone, talked to the Chinese, got on the phone, talked to the Indians, talked to the Brazilians, I believe. He didn't talk to Iran, and he may or may not have talked to North Korea, but he was going to some of the key players that might be having doubts. Wondering is Russia going to sell us down the river? Is Russia going to cut a secret deal that will screw us? And Putin, I'm sure, was reassuring him, "No, here's what's going on. Here's what our intent is." So you've got that. Then you've got this, full-scale meeting today with essentially his cabinet, his national security economic cabinet was in this meeting to talk about what are we going to be doing tomorrow. And some of it they let out in public, and some of it they didn't. You don't see Trump doing that today. He had one photo op for signing a Social Security executive order of some sort. But, he should have, you expect to see him sit down with Marco Rubio, Pete Hegseth, maybe bring in Scott Bessent. But, he's not doing that. So we'll see. They get up to, I guess they're going to deal with Elmendorf, Alaska. And that's 4 hours behind us on East Coast time. So if it'll be one of those things. If their meeting wraps up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon out there, that's 6, 7 p.m. here, and that'd be like they're about 11-hour difference from Moscow. So Putin, in fact, my understanding is he's leaving today, flying out today to start heading there, because he's got about 8, 9 time zones to fly through. That's how damn big Russia is.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this too. I think that I just think the Russians are not deluded like some people tend to suddenly think they suddenly like became idiots or something at the time. And you got to take this into account. The U.S. is trying to, sneak in the back door into Azerbaijan. And if people haven't been paying attention to this, so the U.S. wants to buy this, whatever this corridor was. Zangzur. Okay. So they want to buy this corridor, which is this little sliver of land on the backside of both Russia and Iran. Iran is saying we'll go to war over that.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they would. I would think that Iran would look at it and say, if you put bases on there, you're going to attack. You're going to do drones attacks. Israel's going to attack. Terrorist attack. If you do that, you're going to attack us from that base. And we might as well fight you now as later. So the war they wanted with Iran, they may get. And if you're Russia, you may say, you know what, that's a way that I don't necessarily have to fight the U.S., but I can arm Iran. Russia's going to be 100%, but that's their back door.
Well, and then I think most Americans don't understand how small, not in terms of landmass, but small population-wise, these Caucasus countries are. Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. I looked it up. Georgia comes in about 2.7 million people. Okay? That's not even a good borough in New York City, all right? 2.7 million people in that entire country. Um, the same for Armenia is like 3 million. And then Azerbaijan is 10 million. Well, does Armenia really want to go to war with Iran, who's got 91 million people? They've got army and resources,
Yeah.
and the same. Russia could go in and crush those countries if it had to. So you got to step back and say, what the hell is the United States? Why was Trump signing? Making a big deal about signing this peace agreement they did last Friday with Armenia and Azerbaijan? Because what is the U.S. interest there? We don't need their oil and gas. It's not like they got some special rare earth mineral that they only produce that we can't get anywhere else. This is nothing more than a sheer power play on the part of the United States to flip the bird to Russia and to Iran, and to create a rationale for us to deploy U.S. military there along that border.
How about this, Larry? Where that sits, I mean, it's a landlocked country. You're right on Russia. I mean, you're right on Iran's border. Russia's a few feet away. If anything kicked off, I wouldn't want to be on that base. They will turn that base to disintegrate that base and turn it to dust in 10 minutes. If the war or something started or whatever, that base would be gone. The Russian missiles couldn't reach it before the Iranian missiles would get there. So yeah, you can get in there and say, ha ha ha, look where we are. We're right on Iran's border. But if something in Israel starts throwing, we're throwing missiles at Iran again, we're firing on the US, we're going to fly in some big B-52s or whatever. Iran's can say, well, we're at war now. Guess what? The first thing we're going to do, that base has to go. You're going to attack us from a lot of places, but there ain't going to be enough left of that base to attack us from.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to be the one. It is, there used to be a time when these bases, you projected power. Now, with the power of missiles, and based on what we saw with Iran's ability with missiles and our lack of air defense, it would be a fat target if something started. That's the other part of it.
Yeah. No, exactly right. And just the logistics challenge in trying to resupply.
How about this? Dien Bien Phu. You're familiar with that story? That's what it would be. It would be Dien Bien Phu. We're going to go out into the Vietnamese, into the center of and we're going to put a fort in there, and we're going to attack them, and we're going to show them how tough we are. And then they turned the fort they disintegrated the fort in a few hours.
Of course, also they put Dien Bien Phu was down in sort of in the valley, surrounded by mountains, and so that's really, You know what happens when you build a base at the bottom of the toilet bowl?
You get pooped on.
That's where it all collects. Okay, you guarantee you're going to get shit on. Okay, so this is. See, I maintain Russia's showing remarkable patience and tolerance, because Trump has been doing one provocative act after another for the last 3 months against Russia, such as, the failed attempt to assassinate Putin. That had CIA involvement. I guarantee you that at minimum we knew about it, and we could have warned Putin away. The terrorist attacks that took place in Bryansk on the railroad bridge, or the bridge that fell on top of the train, again, with Western assistance. The insertion of Trump putting the spider web attacks on June 1st, that the drone attacks, the same tactic that was used in Iran 13 days later to attack strategic bombers in Russia. Didn't really destroy any to speak of, but again, it was a strike at them. And then that followed that up with deploying, for the first time since 2008, nuclear bombs back into Europe, into at least 6 bases. So it's just, and then on the very day that Witkoff's meeting with Putin, Trump signs an executive order declaring Russia a national security threat. In other words, an enemy. if I was doing those kinds of things to you personally, and then I said, "Hey, Garland, I want to be your friend. Let's go out to dinner," you'd be going, "Man, I ain't hanging around with you."
Let me throw two other things I want to throw at you, just get your opinion, because I'm a real suspicious guy, right? I know Rubio, has whether it's Cuba or Nicaragua or he's the Venezuela. He wants war. He's the neocon of the Americas. He's upset that we don't have one of his wars here. Okay. So the U.S. says, hey, we're going to declare Maduro a drug leader or whatever. And then within days, they say, we're preparing to take military action against these cartels. Am I overly suspicious saying, are these sons of bitches going to start a war in Venezuela or do some violence in Venezuela? You know what I mean? I'm real suspicious. I always put these things, I'm like, are they really, are they like, we don't have a war in our own region. Venezuela is the place we want to go.
I wouldn't rule it out. And again, the foolishness in thinking that we can use military force to defeat the cartels. Defeating them is very, very easy. Go after the money. And the reason we don't go after the money is because of the number of U.S. corporations and businesses that are taking drug money.
Yep.
And I'll give you, I had personal experience, and now this was 20 years ago, but we got called up by John Deere. Now, understand, one of my business partners and dear friends, a guy named John Moynihan, he ran DEA's undercover money laundering operations for 4 years in New York City. I mean, he set up front companies. He sent 180 people to prison on cases that he built, evidence he collected. There's really nobody in the world better, in my opinion. Nobody with John's skill. And so we went to John Deere, and John, my buddy Moynihan, is the one who had uncovered the black market peso. You ever heard of that?
No.
Okay, so the black market peso was what happened in the 1980s. The Colombians had all their drug money was up in Miami, Orlando, Tampa, and getting all that cash back to Colombia was an issue. So what they did, they started paying families to go to Orlando, to Disney World, and while they were there, they'd pay for the trip, they'd pay for the hotel, they'd pay for the week. All these families had to do was go open bank accounts, 5 bank accounts, husband and wife. So they'd open a number jointly, they'd open a number separately, and then they'd get, when you open those bank accounts, they would be given starter checks.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd go back to Colombia. They'd sign all the starter checks. Meanwhile, up in Miami, Orlando, Tampa, they had the Smurfs, Pitufos. The Pitufos go around every day with cash from the stash house and deposit it into these accounts. Some $2,000, $4,000. They stay below the reporting level so that they wouldn't trip off suspicious activity reports. Well, after a while, those bank accounts grew in size. So the reason John Deere called us is they just had someone from Colombia wanting to purchase a tractor, and they sent him payment with 6 different checks. Now, why would the Colombians do that? Because if you're the Colombian farmer and you say, okay, I got to take my pesos to buy dollars, and I'm going to have to pay 10 pesos to buy $1 from the official rate. However, if I go to the black market, to the drug dealers, because they've got all this cash, they'll give me those dollars for 7 pesos. Would you rather pay 10 pesos for 7? Well, I'd rather pay 7. That was the black market peso.
Gotcha.
Now, but the point is, it's not just John Deere. Philip Morris, Japan Tobacco, R.J. Reynolds, all the liquor companies, Nike, across the board. Everybody is benefiting from this drug money. And the back and forth across the border there in Mexico and in Texas, huge volumes. I know of one case that involves a congressman, and I'll say his name now, Henry Cuellar. Cuellar has been investigated and is now he's under charges on something different. But he had a relationship with one of these duty-free businesses on the border that was taking money in from ISIS and the drug cartel. So there's, you're getting this relationship out there that's existing. And then, going back to the military question here, notice that a number of the mercenaries that are showing up to fight for the Ukrainians and getting trained in drugs and drone technology are going to go back and work in these drug cartels in Colombia and Mexico.
They're Colombians. Yeah, a lot of Colombians.
Yeah, a lot of Colombians. So this notion that we're going to be militarily take these guys on, go after the money. The money will cripple them. That's what this is all about. They're not selling the drugs because it's a great product. They're selling it because it is the best way to make lots of money. Dangerous, but it's lucrative as hell.
Remember what they got HSBC for?
Yeah.
Drug money from the cartels.
Yeah.
And what did HSBC do? They went out and they hired Jim Comey, and Comey negotiated the deal for HSBC to get them to pay a fine and get them off if they never do it again. And they got caught again in another year. Well, I've heard it. I know someone who does money stuff with banks, and he says estimated 30% of these major banks. Estimated 30% of it is drug money from, you got the Afghan drugs that you got all over. And so, like you said, they ain't going to touch it. The other thing, okay, so this is hold on again, Garland, who is always always very, very paranoid about what the government's up to. So I'm going to ask you about this. Let me see. Stop screen. Share screen. This is all over. It comes from a Washington Post story. Pentagon planning rapid deploy reaction force to quell civilian dissent. So they said, okay, we're going to put National Guard in the cities to deal with crime. At the same time, this comes out. As the blah, blah, blah domestic power, the Pentagon is reportedly developing a multi-million-dollar plan to create a domestic civil disturbance quick reaction force armed with weapons and riot gear to be deployed instantaneously to quell civil unrest. Right? And I'm like, So I read it. There's a Washington Post article. So what they're saying, the Pentagon, well, wait a minute, that ain't the National Guard. They're going to have this rapid reaction force to quell riots and civil unrest and things of that nature. And I'm like, paranoid Garland. I always think to myself, there are those who suspect we could be heading towards some kind of a 2008 crisis. You got all these people pissed off about what's going on in Gaza and all that kind of stuff. And then I see the government saying, hey, we're going to come up with some rapid, civil unrest, and riots and things like that. Maybe I'm too paranoid, but I am always concerned about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. You're not paranoid. It is, but it's just, the practicality of it is the thing I question, because number one, you already have SWAT teams, rapid response teams with all police departments.
Yes, you do.
In major cities anyway, not in small towns, but, I know here in Manatee County, they're equipped to handle things like that. But I was going to ask you your take on what's going on in DC now, because I've heard some hysterically describe it as martial law, and I'm not seeing them coming out and imposing a curfew and locking people in their houses. And I know when I've left there 6 years ago, so I'm about 6 years out of touch with what life is like on the streets. But I don't know, has it gotten worse, gotten better?
Oh, there's a lot of crime in DC. There's a lot of issues and a lot of people concerned about now whether or not the National Guard will do anything about that kind of crime. I have my doubts.
Yeah, I agree.
So I think this is my personal opinion. I haven't A, knowing DC well, and B, having spent 27 years as in law enforcement. I don't really think it'll make a difference. I don't think it'll cause a problem. I think it'll be something where people will go bananas about, you know what I mean? The people that don't like it will go, this is madness. This is crazy. They're trying to kill us all and blah, blah, blah. They're taking over. I don't think it's the guys themselves. They're not going to be doing investigations. They're not going to be getting in depth into anything. They're going to be walking around various areas. So I don't know that it'll do much, but I'll put it like this. I think the people who are freaked out about it, that it's not going to be what they think it is, where, they're all going to come and grab people and mow every down on the body down on the streets with machine guns. And the people that think it's going to make a big difference in crime, I really don't. So it'll be a lot of, you know what I mean? People arguing and fussing and about this stuff. But yeah, tons of crime. I remember like last winter, I had a heavy parka, right? And it's one of these Canada Goose, whatever it is, right? Yeah. And then I had people say, you better watch wearing that. And I'm like, why? And they're like, it's all in the news. If you wear one of these parkas, people would come up and just ride. And I'm looking, they're like literally like some guys walking down the street and a car pulls over, sticks a gun in his face and steals his coat. And I'm like, well, that's not a good thing. And that's when I started looking into things. And I'm like, yeah, crime's getting pretty bad here. So yeah, crime's pretty nasty in DC, but whether this will help, we shall see. I don't really think so, but we'll see.
Well, actually, what I was fascinated by was Muriel Bowser was actually fairly, she wasn't screaming and hollering about it. She was like sort of welcoming it. Same with the police chief. And when you look at when you watch to see who's out protesting, it's all what I call these yuppie white liberals.
Types. The activist types are out there.
You saw the guy that assaulted the police officer with a Subway sandwich. Did you see that one?
No.
Okay, so this 37-year-old guy is up yelling, jumping up and down, yelling in the face of this one cop. Then has a Subway sandwich in his hand, throws it, hits the cop in the chest. Okay, guy turns around and runs. So the cops are already at a disadvantage because they're each wearing about 20 pounds of gear.
Right.
Anyway, they run this guy down. They arrest him. Guess where he worked? Department of Justice. He was a lawyer. He was a lawyer in the Department of Justice. You can't make this stuff up, brother.
I will guarantee you he had, knowing DC like I do, I will guarantee you he had a Ukraine flag in his, you know what I mean? The liberals in DC, they got these friggin' Ukraine flags in their yards. They're just sickening.
Well, he's now unemployed and he's got a felony charge. So, he may be appearing on the dating scene in prisons.
Yeah, exactly. People are going to get freaked out about it, but to me, they'll wander around. They'll walk around for several months. I don't see where it's going to be a tremendous inconvenience to anybody. You know what I mean?
I draw the contrast between Moscow and St. Petersburg and Washington, D.C. and New York City. Because, I've walked around, my last time in New York City, again, it was 6 years ago, August. But I was stepping over homeless people, and I'd walk everywhere. I walked from Midtown down to Koreatown. They had some great Korean barbecue places. But and how you walk so that nobody's going to mess with you. In other words, you have to give off a certain vibe, posturing, if you will, that they know that if they came up and tried to mess with you, they'd there might be a fight and they don't want to have that much hassle. But I never felt that vibe at all in Moscow or St. Petersburg. And people say, "Oh, well, you're probably being followed by undercover police." I'm pretty good at detecting surveillance. I didn't see that. But it was what was fascinating there is, regardless of time, women were walking the street, and I'm not talking women who are out selling sex. I'm just talking women going about their normal business by themselves at night, not getting hassled, feeling safe. And so that's what we've lost that in America.
Because I think our cities are falling apart.
Yeah.
I live in the suburbs outside of Baltimore, right? And you just see that people who live in cities are moving out of the cities. They don't feel safe. They don't like it. It's overpriced and not, you know what I mean? Yeah. People are moving away from the cities. The cities used to be, I use this word guardedly, the jewel of the empire, because I hate to think about the reality that I live in an empire, but if you've got 900 bases, it's kind of hard to think otherwise. But it used to be these beautiful cities. I remember years ago, somebody telling me, I went to San Francisco and it was so beautiful. When I was young, a girl that I knew, she goes, "Oh, I went to San Francisco. It was so beautiful. I'm going to move to San Francisco." She moved to San Francisco. Ain't nobody moving to San Francisco. They're moving the hell out of San Francisco. Now. Our cities are falling to pieces. They're crumbling. They're, just, drug infested. They're just a mess. And the reality is, and let me add this, I got to say this, and that's one of the many reasons that people are so pissed when they see another $100 billion going to Ukraine and 50 billion going here and 100 billion going there. Even they're talking about buying this place from Armenia, 50 billion.
Yeah.
Or renting it for 90 years. Yeah. And they look around and they say, our country's falling apart. Why? Our roads are crap, everything. What could we do with 50 billion throughout the United States? What happened to projects like, we're going to put high-speed internet into small towns and rural areas? What happened to, we need bridges? Now we got $50 billion. Trump told us that money was going here, and now it's going to Armenia, and it's going to be laundered into the hands of these defense contracts where they'll build some base that should cost $50 million, and it'll cost them $5 billion.
Well, when you were on the job, did you ever do any policing in Pigtown there in Baltimore?
Familiar with it. It's now called, what's it called now? Washington Village or something. They renamed it. But yes, familiar with Pigtown. Yeah, my buddy did, though. My buddy worked in Pigtown for years.
So I had experience. I helped out at a church summer camp 30 years ago. I was basically there as the disciplinarian to keep the kids in line.
Oh, good gracious!
And they brought a group of kids down from Pigtown. Now, because there's somebody who's working in a mission up there with the trying to work with these kids and families. And we were warned about one 11-year-old boy to be cautious with him because of his sexual experience. His mother had started tricking him out at the age of 8.
She was a heroin addict, no doubt. Yeah. That's what it was. She was a heroin addict.
And this was, and these people say, these were black kids. No, these are white kids.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a big deal.
So it was not confined to just one racial group, man. This was across the board. But it's like, how can you allow this kind of depravity to go on in these children, across just to be damaged in this way? Because I guarantee, you grow up with that as a kid. How can you even be a functioning adult? Or what kind of adult are you going to be? I mean, it's just a nightmare.
I can tell you something I know from law enforcement, just as an anecdote. A lot of people don't realize this. And here's what you see. The strippers, the prostitutes, 50 to 80% of them, you know what they are? Here's what happens. Girls, their mother, parents, or whatever, either drug addicts, die, whatever, they become orphans. They put them in when they go from family to family, foster care, what have you, right? Okay. Now here's a young girl. Turns 18, right? She's been in foster care. She's never been treated right. Might be been sexually abused. Never had a fair chance in life. Orphan, whatever. Just never had a shot in life. She's 18 years old. She turns 18. You know what they do? They put her out on the street. Okay, You're not in foster care anymore. You're on your own. She might barely know how to read and write, barely have any education, what have you. So you have these young, and a lot of times, you know, with an 18-year-old girl, these girls will be pretty. A pretty 18-year-old girl, beautiful 18-year-old girl. And now they say you're no longer in the foster care program. Here's a few dollars, a couple $100. Go out, find yourself an apartment, a job. She knows nothing, hasn't a clue. She ends up in prostitution. She ends up in drugs. She ends up as a stripper. You know what I mean? And I've always said, from my experience in that, man, that's something this country really should do something different about. You know what I mean? Those girls are not in any position to be on the street. You know, so again, it's what we talk about. There's so many things like that we think about when you see the reality of things. You just say to yourself, and we got to spend another 50 billion on bases, 100 billion on these lunatic Nazis in Ukraine.
More overseas, buy more weapons. Let's not fix the social ills. Let's not fix the people.
Yeah, you know, those are real things, you know, that I that's just like something I saw, and you're like, it seems to me that all of the prostitutes and the strippers and these heroin addict girls, they're all like, you talk to one after the other, and they're standing around talking about what foster care was like because they were all in it.
Yeah,
that's reality.
Just awful.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, Larry, well, geez, we started off and we got down to the curing the social ills, but life is real, and you know, at any rate. All right, well, Larry,
let me just say, the world would be a better place if everybody could wear tropical shirts.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're starting a movement. We're starting a tropical short movement for peace. We need a name for it. At any rate, the important thing. I lost Sonar 21. Well, before we go, I must make sure that everybody knows where to go daily to check for information, and that is Larry's website, which is Sonar 21. Sonar21.com. As you can see, this is Larry's site, and he's got all kinds of great articles. He'll be on top of all the things that you need to be on top of, and you will too. Make sure you subscribe so you can support him through PayPal, PayShoot, Patreon, or Buy Me a Coffee. Larry, thanks a lot for your hard work, and I really appreciate you coming on the show and hanging out with us every week.
Oh, Brother Nixon, always appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right, everybody, don't forget, share this on all your social media platforms.